In the 1950s, moms made planned-over dinners that mattered. They didn't cook 7 different meals. They roasted one big Sunday roast and transformed it into 6 completely different dinners all week long. These weren't leftovers. They were a genius meal to stretched budgets and fed families. Let's rediscover these 30 forgotten planned-over classics 1950s moms made that prove smart. Planning beats expensive groceries. Sunday beef roast with Yorkshire pudding was the centerpiece of the 1950s planned-over strategy because moms intentionally cooked a large roast, usually 4 to 5 pounds, knowing it would feed the family for an entire week. The roast was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic, then slow roasted in the oven until tender and juicy. Yorkshire pudding, made from a simple batter of eggs, flour, and milk baked in the roast drippings, accompanied the meal along with mashed potatoes, gravy, and vegetables. Sunday dinner was the most elaborate meal of the week, and families gathered around the table to enjoy the perfectly cooked roast. After dinner, moms carefully wrapped the remaining roast and stored it in the refrigerator, already planning Monday's hot beef sandwiches, Tuesday's hash, and Wednesday's stroganoff. The Sunday roast wasn't just dinner. It was the foundation of an entire week's worth of meals, proving that 1950s moms were masters of strategic meal planning. Beef and potato pie was the Monday transformation of Sunday's roast, using leftover beef, mashed potatoes, and gravy to create a completely different dinner. Moms diced the leftover roast beef into small cubes, mixed it with leftover gravy, carrots, peas, and onions, then spread the mixture into a greased casserole dish. Leftover mashed potatoes were spread on top like a crust, smoothed with a fork, then dotted with butter and baked until golden and bubbling. The finished pie emerged from the oven with a crispy potato topping and a rich, savory filling that tasted nothing like Sunday's roast. Families ate beef and potato pie with a side salad or bread, and children never complained because the presentation was completely different. The recipe was beloved because it required no expensive ingredients. Everything came from Sunday's meal, and it fed the family for under $2. Beef and potato pie proved that 1950s moms were experts at transformation. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Beef with mushroom gravy over rice was the Tuesday transformation, turning leftover roast beef into a completely new dinner with a rich, savory sauce. Moms sliced the remaining roast beef into thin strips, then made a quick mushroom gravy by sautéing canned mushrooms in butter, adding flour to thicken, then stirring in beef broth and cream of mushroom soup. The sliced beef was added to the gravy and simmered gently until heated through, creating a rich, creamy sauce that coated every piece of meat. The beef and gravy were served over white rice, and the meal was accompanied by green beans or peas. Families loved this dinner because it tasted completely different from Sunday's roast. The gravy transformed the meat into something that felt like a restaurant meal. The recipe was inexpensive, quick to prepare, and used pantry staples like canned soup and rice, proving that 1950s moms could stretch one roast into multiple impressive dinners. Beef goulash was the Wednesday transformation, using leftover roast beef in a hearty tomato-based stew that tasted nothing like the original roast. Moms diced the remaining beef into small cubes, then sautéed onions and bell peppers in a large pot. Canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, paprika, and a pinch of sugar were added, along with the beef, and the mixture simmered on the stovetop for 20 minutes. The goulash was served over elbow macaroni or egg noodles, and the rich, tangy sauce made every bite flavorful and satisfying. Families loved beef goulash because it tasted like an entirely different meal. The tomato sauce and paprika disguised the roast beef completely. The recipe was beloved because it fed the family for under $2, required no expensive ingredients, and used canned goods from the pantry. Beef goulash proved that 1950s moms were masters of reinvention, turning one Sunday roast into multiple completely different dinners throughout the week. Beef and cabbage skillet was the Thursday transformation, stretching the last bits of Sunday's roast with inexpensive cabbage and potatoes. Moms diced the remaining roast beef into small pieces, then fried chopped cabbage and diced potatoes in a large skillet with butter or bacon grease. The beef was added to the skillet, along with salt, pepper, and a splash of vinegar, and everything was fried together until the cabbage softened and the potatoes turned golden. The finished dish was hearty, filling, and budget-friendly, and families ate it with bread or cornbread. Beef and cabbage skillet was beloved because it stretched the last of the roast with vegetables that cost only pennies, proving that 1950s moms could make a little meat go a long way. The recipe required no expensive ingredients, no complicated techniques, and fed the family for under $2, demonstrating the genius of planned-over cooking that turned one Sunday roast into an entire week of different meals. These 5 planned-over dinners, Sunday beef roast with Yorkshire pudding, beef and potato pie, beef with mushroom gravy over rice, beef goulash, and beef and cabbage skillet, prove 1950s moms were strategic meal planners. They transformed one Sunday roast into 5 completely different dinners. Let's see 5 more genius transformations that stretched every bite. Beef chop suey was the Friday transformation, using the last bits of Sunday's roast in a quick, Asian-inspired skillet meal. Moms sliced the remaining beef into thin strips, then stir-fried chopped celery, onions, and canned bean sprouts in a hot skillet with a little oil. The beef was added back to the skillet, along with a simple sauce made from soy sauce, beef broth, and a spoonful of cornstarch to thicken. The mixture cooked for just a few minutes until the sauce was glossy and thick, then was served over white rice or crispy chow mein noodles. Families loved beef chop suey because it tasted exotic and different, nothing like Sunday's roast dinner. The recipe was inexpensive, used canned vegetables from the pantry, and required no special ingredients. Beef chop suey proved that 1950s moms could transform one Sunday roast into an entire week of different meals, never serving the same dish twice. Beef and tomato macaroni was the Saturday transformation, using every last scrap of Sunday's roast in a budget-friendly pasta dish. Moms chopped the remaining beef into tiny pieces, then mixed it with cooked elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, and a sprinkle of Italian seasoning. The mixture was poured into a casserole dish, topped with a handful of breadcrumbs or grated cheese, then baked until bubbly and golden. The finished dish was hearty, filling, and tasted completely different from Sunday's roast. The tomato sauce and pasta transformed the beef into something that resembled Italian comfort food. Families loved beef and tomato macaroni because it was inexpensive, filling, and used pantry staples like pasta and canned tomatoes. The recipe proved that 1950s moms could stretch one Sunday roast into an entire week of completely different meals, never wasting a single bite and feeding the family for just pennies per serving. Beef mulligan stew was a hearty, rustic transformation that used leftover roast beef, vegetables, and whatever was in the pantry to create a filling one-pot meal. Moms diced the remaining beef into cubes, then added it to a large pot with chopped onions, carrots, celery, potatoes, and canned tomatoes. Beef broth, water, and simple seasonings like salt, pepper, and bay leaves were added, and the stew simmered on the stovetop for 30 to 40 minutes until the vegetables were tender and the flavors melded together. The finished stew was thick, hearty, and warming, and families ate it with crusty bread or cornbread. Beef mulligan stew was beloved because it stretched the last of the roast with inexpensive vegetables, cost under $2 to make, and fed the entire family with one pot. The recipe proved that 1950s moms were masters of resourcefulness, transforming one Sunday roast into multiple different meals throughout the week, without ever serving the same dish twice. Beef slumgullion was a quick, budget-friendly skillet meal that used leftover roast beef, macaroni, and canned tomatoes to create a hearty, filling dinner. Moms chopped the remaining beef into small pieces and then browned it in a large skillet with chopped onions. Cooked elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, and a bit of beef broth were added to the skillet, along with salt, pepper, and a pinch of chili powder for flavor. The mixture was stirred together and simmered for 10 minutes until the sauce thickened and the flavors combined. The finished dish was simple, filling, and inexpensive, and families ate it with bread or a side salad. Beef slumgullion was beloved because it required no complicated techniques, used pantry staples, and fed the family for under $2. The recipe proved that 1950s moms could transform one Sunday roast into an entire week of different meals, stretching every bite without wasting anything. Beef and celery casserole was the final transformation of Sunday's roast. Using every last bit of meat in a creamy, budget-friendly baked dish. Moms chopped the remaining beef into small pieces, then mixed it with chopped celery, cooked rice, cream of celery soup, and a splash of milk. The mixture was poured into a greased casserole dish, topped with crushed crackers or breadcrumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. The finished casserole was creamy, comforting, and tasted nothing like Sunday's roast. The celery soup and rice transformed the beef into something completely different. Families loved beef and celery casserole because it was inexpensive, filling, and used canned soup from the pantry. The recipe proved that 1950s moms could stretch one Sunday roast into an entire week of completely different meals, feeding the family without wasting a single bite and spending only pennies per serving on groceries. These 10 planned-over dinners, from Sunday beef roast with Yorkshire pudding to beef and celery casserole, prove 1950s moms were genius meal planners. They transformed one roast into 10 completely different dinners, never wasting a bite. Let's see 10 more transformations using roast chicken that stretched budgets and fed families all week long. Sunday roast chicken with stuffing was the centerpiece of the second week's planned-over strategy, where 1950s moms intentionally roasted a large chicken, usually 4 to 5 pounds, knowing it would provide the foundation for an entire week of different meals. The chicken was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, butter, and herbs, and then roasted in the oven until the skin turned golden brown and crispy. Homemade stuffing made from bread cubes, celery, onions, and sage was either baked inside the chicken or in a separate pan alongside the roast. Sunday dinner was the most elaborate meal of the week, and families gathered around the table to enjoy the perfectly roasted chicken served with mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, and cranberry sauce. After dinner, moms carefully carved the remaining chicken, separating the breast meat from the dark meat, and saved every scrap, including the bones for soup. The leftover chicken was wrapped and stored in the refrigerator, and moms already had the entire week planned. Monday's chicken salad sandwiches, Tuesday's chicken soup, Wednesday's chicken a la king, Thursday's croquettes, Friday's pot pie, and Saturday's casserole. The Sunday roast chicken wasn't just dinner. It was a strategic meal plan that stretched the family budget and ensured no food was wasted. This intentional cooking method proved that 1950s moms were brilliant planners who understood how to feed their families well without spending extra money, turning one $4 chicken into an entire week of completely different, satisfying meals that kept everyone happy and well fed. Chicken and mushroom pie was the Monday transformation of Sunday's roast chicken, turning leftover chicken breast and dark meat into a completely different dinner. Moms diced the leftover chicken into bite-sized cubes, then made a creamy mushroom sauce by sautéing canned mushrooms in butter, adding flour to create a roux, and then slowly stirring in chicken broth and milk until the sauce thickened into a rich, velvety gravy. The diced chicken was folded into the mushroom sauce, along with frozen peas and diced carrots. Then the entire mixture was poured into a greased pie dish. A simple pie crust, either homemade or from a refrigerated package, was laid over the top, crimped around the edges, and brushed with a beaten egg for a golden finish. The pie baked in the oven until the crust turned golden brown and the filling bubbled around the edges. The finished chicken and mushroom pie emerged from the oven looking elegant and bakery quality, and when sliced, revealed a creamy, savory filling loaded with tender chicken and vegetables. Families ate the pie with a side salad or mashed potatoes, and children never realized they were eating Sunday's leftover chicken because the presentation was completely different. The recipe was beloved because it required no expensive ingredients. The chicken was already cooked, the mushrooms came from a can, and the vegetables were frozen staples. Chicken and mushroom pie proved that 1950s moms were masters of transformation, turning one Sunday roast into multiple impressive dinners throughout the week. Chicken chowder was the Tuesday transformation, using leftover roast chicken in a creamy, hearty soup that tasted nothing like Sunday's roast. Moms diced the remaining chicken into small pieces, then started the chowder by sautéing chopped onions, celery, and diced potatoes in a large pot with butter. Once the vegetables softened, flour was sprinkled over the top to create a roux. Then chicken broth and milk were slowly added, stirring constantly to prevent lumps. The diced chicken was added to the pot along with corn kernels, either canned or frozen, and the chowder simmered gently on the stovetop for 20 to 30 minutes until the potatoes were tender and the soup thickened into a creamy, rich consistency. Some moms added a bay leaf or a pinch of thyme for extra flavor, and the finished chowder was served in bowls with oyster crackers or crusty bread on the side. Families loved chicken chowder because it tasted completely different from Sunday's roast. The creamy soup transformed the chicken into something comforting and warming, perfect for cold evenings. The recipe was inexpensive because it stretched the leftover chicken with potatoes, corn, and milk, and it fed the entire family for under $2. Chicken chowder proved that 1950s moms could reinvent one Sunday roast into multiple completely different meals, never serving the same dish twice and always keeping dinner interesting and delicious. Chicken jambalaya was the Wednesday transformation, using leftover roast chicken in a spicy, flavorful rice dish inspired by Southern cooking. Moms diced the remaining chicken into small pieces, then started the jambalaya by sautéing chopped onions, bell peppers, and celery, the holy trinity of Cajun cooking, in a large skillet with butter or oil. Canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, chicken broth, and white rice were added to the skillet, along with seasonings like paprika, cayenne pepper, garlic powder, salt, and black pepper. The diced chicken was stirred into the mixture, and the skillet was covered and simmered on the stovetop for 20 to 25 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid and became tender and fluffy. The finished jambalaya was colorful, aromatic, and packed with flavor, and families served it directly from the skillet with a side of cornbread or a simple green salad. Chicken jambalaya was beloved because it tasted exotic and completely different from Sunday's roast. The spices and tomatoes transformed the chicken into something that felt like a special occasion meal. The recipe was inexpensive because it used pantry staples like rice, canned tomatoes, and basic spices, and it fed the entire family for under $2. Chicken jambalaya proved that 1950s moms were masters of reinvention, turning one Sunday roast chicken into an entire week of completely different, flavorful meals that kept everyone happy and satisfied. Chicken and biscuit casserole was the Thursday transformation, using leftover roast chicken in a comforting baked dish topped with fluffy biscuits. Moms diced the remaining chicken into bite-sized pieces, then made a creamy sauce by combining cream of chicken soup, milk, frozen mixed vegetables, peas, carrots, corn, and a pinch of black pepper in a large bowl. The chicken was folded into the creamy mixture, then poured into a greased casserole dish. Refrigerated biscuit dough was cut into quarters, and the biscuit pieces were arranged on top of the chicken mixture, covering the entire surface. The casserole baked in the oven until the biscuits turned golden brown and fluffy, and the creamy chicken filling bubbled up around the edges. The finished casserole was hearty, comforting, and looked impressive when brought to the table, and families loved the combination of tender chicken, creamy sauce, and fluffy biscuits in every bite. Children especially enjoyed chicken and biscuit casserole because the biscuits made it feel like a special treat, and they never realized they were eating Sunday's leftover chicken. The recipe was beloved because it required no expensive ingredients. The chicken was already cooked, the soup came from a can, and the biscuits came from a tube. Chicken and biscuit casserole proved that 1950s moms could transform one Sunday roast into multiple impressive dinners throughout the week, always keeping meals interesting and delicious without spending extra money. These 5 chicken planned-over dinners: Sunday roast chicken with stuffing, chicken and mushroom pie, chicken chowder, chicken jambalaya, and chicken and biscuit casserole, prove 1950s moms were strategic meal planners. They transformed one Sunday roast chicken into 5 completely different dinners. Let's see 5 more genius chicken transformations that stretched every bite. Chicken loaf was the Friday transformation, using leftover roast chicken in a budget-friendly meatloaf-style dish that tasted nothing like Sunday's roast. Moms finely chopped or ground the remaining chicken, then mixed it with breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, finely diced onions and celery, chicken broth, salt, pepper, and poultry seasoning in a large bowl. The mixture was shaped into a loaf, placed in a greased loaf pan, and baked in the oven until firm and golden on top. Some moms brushed the top with melted butter or a simple glaze made from ketchup and brown sugar for extra flavor and shine. The finished chicken loaf was sliced and served with mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans, and it looked and tasted like a completely different meal. The texture was firm and sliceable like meatloaf, and the seasonings transformed the chicken flavor. Families loved chicken loaf because it felt like a hearty, substantial dinner, and children never complained because it didn't look like leftover chicken. The recipe was beloved because it required no expensive ingredients. Everything came from Sunday's roast or the pantry, and it fed the entire family for under $2. Chicken loaf proved that 1950s moms were experts at stretching one Sunday roast chicken into multiple completely different meals, never wasting a bite, and always keeping dinner interesting, satisfying, and budget-friendly throughout the entire week. Chicken soufflé was the Saturday transformation, using leftover roast chicken in an elegant, impressive dish that looked fancy but was surprisingly easy to make. Moms finely chopped the remaining chicken, then made a thick white sauce by melting butter in a saucepan, adding flour to create a roux, then slowly whisking in milk until the sauce thickened. The chopped chicken was stirred into the white sauce along with grated cheese, salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg for depth of flavor. Egg yolks were beaten and stirred into the chicken mixture. Then egg whites were whipped until stiff peaks formed and gently folded into the mixture to create a light, airy texture. Then the soufflé mixture was poured into a greased baking dish and baked in a hot oven until it puffed up, turned golden brown on top, and set in the center. The finished chicken soufflé emerged from the oven, tall, fluffy, and impressive-looking, and families served it immediately while it was still puffed and warm. Chicken soufflé was beloved because it looked and tasted like restaurant-quality French cooking, yet it was made entirely from leftover chicken and pantry staples. The recipe proved that 1950s moms could transform one Sunday roast chicken into an entire week of completely different meals, ending the week with something elegant and special that made the family feel like they were dining in a fancy restaurant, all while spending just pennies per serving. Chicken curry over rice was an exotic transformation that used leftover roast chicken in a mildly spiced, flavorful sauce that tasted nothing like Sunday's roast. Moms diced the remaining chicken into bite-sized pieces, then made a simple curry sauce by sautéing chopped onions and apples in butter until softened. Curry powder, a popular spice in 1950s American kitchens, flour, chicken broth, and milk were added to the pan, and the sauce was stirred constantly until it thickened into a smooth, golden gravy. The diced chicken was added to the curry sauce along with raisins and a pinch of salt, and the mixture simmered gently for 10 to 15 minutes until the flavors melded together. The finished curry was served over white rice, and families often accompanied it with side dishes like chutney, chopped peanuts, shredded coconut, and diced bananas for a complete curry dinner experience. Chicken curry was beloved because it tasted exotic and special, completely different from Sunday's roast, and the mild spice level was perfect for families with children. The recipe was inexpensive because it used leftover chicken, pantry staples like curry powder and raisins, and affordable rice, feeding the entire family for under $2. Chicken curry over rice proved that 1950s moms were adventurous cooks who could transform one Sunday roast chicken into multiple internationally inspired meals, keeping dinner interesting and exciting throughout the entire week. Chicken and waffle supper was a comforting, budget-friendly transformation that turned leftover roast chicken into a breakfast-for-dinner style meal that families loved. Moms shredded or diced the remaining chicken, then made a creamy chicken gravy by combining cream of chicken soup, milk, and the leftover chicken in a saucepan, heating it gently on the stovetop until warm and smooth. Frozen waffles were toasted until crispy and golden, then placed on dinner plates and topped with the creamy chicken gravy. Some moms added frozen peas or diced carrots to the gravy for extra vegetables and color, making the dish more substantial and nutritious. The finished chicken and waffle supper was served hot, with the crispy waffles providing a perfect base for the creamy, savory chicken gravy. Families loved this meal because it felt like a special treat. Breakfast for dinner was always exciting, and the combination of sweet waffles and savory chicken gravy was surprisingly delicious. And children especially enjoyed chicken and waffle supper because waffles made dinner feel fun and different. The recipe was beloved because it required no expensive ingredients. The chicken was already cooked, the waffles came from the freezer, and the gravy was made from canned soup. Chicken and waffle. Supper proved that 1950s moms could transform one Sunday roast chicken into creative, satisfying meals that kept everyone happy, never wasting a bite and always finding new ways to make leftover chicken feel exciting and special. Chicken shortcake was the final transformation of Sunday's roast chicken, using every last bit of meat in a unique biscuit-based dish that tasted nothing like the original roast. Moms diced the remaining chicken into small pieces, then made a creamy chicken sauce by combining cream of chicken soup, milk, frozen mixed vegetables, and the diced chicken in a saucepan, heating it gently until warm and thick. Homemade or refrigerated biscuits were baked until golden and fluffy, then split in half while still warm. The bottom half of each biscuit was placed on a dinner plate, topped with a generous scoop of the creamy chicken mixture. Then the top half of the biscuit was placed on top, creating a savory shortcake. Some moms drizzled extra gravy over the top for a more dramatic presentation. The finished chicken shortcake was hearty, comforting, and looked impressive when served, and families loved the combination of fluffy biscuits and creamy chicken filling. The recipe was beloved because it used every last bit of Sunday's roast chicken, required no expensive ingredients. Biscuits, canned soup, and frozen vegetables were all pantry staples, and fed the entire family for under $2. Chicken shortcake proved that 1950s moms were masters of planned-over cooking, transforming one Sunday roast chicken into an entire week of completely different, satisfying meals, never serving the same dish twice, and always keeping dinner interesting, delicious, and budget-friendly from start to finish. These 10 chicken planned-over dinners, from Sunday roast chicken with stuffing to chicken shortcake, prove 1950s moms were genius meal planners. They transformed one roast chicken into 10 completely different dinners, never wasting a bite. Let's see the final 10 transformations using turkey and lamb that stretched budgets all week long. Turkey hash was a hearty, budget-friendly transformation that turned leftover roast turkey into a completely different breakfast for dinner or weekend brunch meal that families absolutely loved and requested again and again. Moms started by dicing leftover turkey into small uniform cubes, ensuring every piece was bite-sized and evenly cut for consistent cooking and presentation. They then prepared diced potatoes by either using leftover mashed potatoes from Sunday dinner or boiling fresh potatoes until fork tender, then dicing them into small, uniform pieces that would crisp up beautifully in the skillet. In a large cast-iron skillet, the workhorse of every 1950s kitchen, butter or bacon grease was heated over medium-high heat until shimmering and fragrant, creating the perfect base for frying. Chopped onions were added to the hot fat and sautéed until soft, translucent, and slightly caramelized, releasing their sweet, savory aroma throughout the kitchen. The diced potatoes were then added to the skillet in an even layer, and they were left undisturbed for several minutes to develop a golden, crispy crust on the bottom before being flipped and stirred. This technique created the signature crispy texture that made hash so irresistible and satisfying. Once the potatoes were golden brown and crispy on multiple sides, the diced turkey was added to the skillet along with salt, freshly ground black pepper, and a generous pinch of dried poultry seasoning that enhanced the turkey flavor beautifully. Everything was stirred together and fried for another 5 to 7 minutes, allowing the turkey to heat through completely and develop slight crispy edges while the potatoes continued to brown and crisp. Some creative moms added leftover turkey gravy to the hash during the final minutes of cooking, creating a rich, savory moisture that bound everything together and added incredible depth of flavor. Others kept the hash simple and dry, preferring the crispy texture, and served it topped with perfectly fried eggs, allowing the rich, runny yolks to create a luxurious sauce when broken and mixed into the hash. The finished turkey hash was golden brown, crispy on the edges, tender in the middle, and incredibly satisfying to eat, with each forkful offering a perfect combination of savory turkey, crispy potatoes, sweet caramelized onions, and aromatic seasonings. Families served turkey hash for leisurely weekend breakfasts, lazy Sunday brunches, or quick weeknight dinners when time was short and everyone was hungry. And children especially loved the crispy texture and the interactive fun of breaking egg yolks over the top and watching them mingle with the hash. Turkey divan casserole was an elegant, restaurant-inspired transformation that turned leftover roast turkey into a creamy, sophisticated baked dish that tasted nothing like the original roast and made families feel like they were dining in an upscale restaurant. Moms started by arranging cooked broccoli spears in the bottom of a greased casserole dish, creating a vibrant green vegetable base that provided both nutrition and beautiful presentation. The broccoli could be fresh broccoli that had been steamed until just tender, or frozen broccoli that had been thawed, drained thoroughly, and patted dry to remove excess moisture that might water down the sauce. Sliced leftover turkey breast was layered carefully on top of the broccoli, covering it completely and creating an even protein layer that would be coated in the luxurious sauce. The signature element that made turkey divan so special was the rich, creamy sauce that combined cream of mushroom soup straight from the can, mayonnaise for richness and tang, sour cream for additional creaminess and slight acidity, fresh lemon juice for brightness, and a generous handful of shredded sharp cheddar cheese that melted into the sauce and added depth of flavor. All these ingredients were whisked together in a bowl until smooth, well combined, and perfectly emulsified, creating a sauce that was thick, rich, and absolutely delicious. This luxurious sauce was poured evenly over the turkey and broccoli layers, ensuring every piece was coated completely and generously. Then the entire casserole was topped with additional shredded cheddar cheese and a generous sprinkling of buttered breadcrumbs that would turn golden and crispy during baking. The casserole was placed in a preheated, moderate oven and baked until the sauce bubbled enthusiastically around the edges, the cheese melted into a gooey, golden blanket, and the breadcrumbs turned crispy, crunchy, and beautifully browned on top. The finished turkey divan casserole emerged from the oven looking impressive, elegant, and absolutely bakery quality, with layers of green broccoli, white turkey, and golden cheese visible when served. Each portion revealed tender broccoli spears, sliced turkey, and incredibly rich, creamy sauce that tasted indulgent and restaurant-worthy. And families loved turkey divan because it transformed humble leftover turkey into something that felt special, fancy, and worthy of serving to guests, proving that 1950s moms could create elegant dinners from planned-over ingredients. Turkey scallop was a comforting layered casserole that transformed leftover roast turkey into a completely different dinner using simple pantry ingredients, a creamy presentation, and satisfying layers that made every bite interesting and delicious. Moms started by slicing leftover turkey into thin, even pieces that would layer nicely in the casserole dish and cook evenly throughout, ensuring every portion had plenty of tender turkey. They then prepared a simple, classic white sauce by melting butter in a medium saucepan over medium heat, adding all-purpose flour to create a smooth roux, then slowly whisking in whole milk while stirring constantly to prevent any lumps from forming. The white sauce was cooked gently, stirring frequently, until it thickened into a smooth, creamy, velvety consistency that coated the back of a spoon beautifully. The sauce was seasoned carefully with salt, freshly ground black pepper, and a small pinch of ground nutmeg that added warmth, depth, and a subtle aromatic quality that elevated the entire dish. In a greased casserole dish, Moms began building the layers by spreading cooked egg noodles or elbow macaroni across the bottom, creating a starchy pasta base that would absorb the creamy sauce and provide substance and heartiness. The sliced turkey was arranged in an even layer on top of the noodles, covering them completely and ensuring every serving would have plenty of protein. The creamy white sauce was poured generously over the turkey and pasta layers, coating everything evenly and thoroughly. Then a thick layer of buttered breadcrumbs was sprinkled generously over the top to create a crispy, golden, crunchy crust during baking. Some creative moms added frozen peas, diced celery, or sliced mushrooms between the layers for extra vegetables, nutrition, color, and visual appeal, making the dish more nutritious and visually impressive when served. The assembled casserole was placed in a preheated moderate oven and baked until the sauce bubbled enthusiastically around the edges, the breadcrumbs turned beautifully golden brown and crispy, and the entire dish was heated through, fragrant and absolutely irresistible. The finished turkey scallop was creamy, comforting, satisfying, and hearty, and with each spoonful offering tender turkey, soft pasta, rich white sauce, and crunchy breadcrumb topping that provided wonderful textural contrast. Families loved turkey scallop because it tasted completely different from Sunday's roast turkey dinner. The creamy sauce, layered presentation, and pasta transformed the turkey into something that felt like a special occasion meal worthy of serving to guests or enjoying on cozy family nights. Turkey chowder was a hearty, creamy soup that transformed leftover roast turkey into a warming, satisfying meal perfect for cold evenings, busy weeknights, and times when families needed something comforting and filling without spending hours in the kitchen. Moms started by dicing leftover turkey into small, bite-sized pieces that would distribute evenly throughout the soup and ensure every spoonful had plenty of protein and flavor. They began the chowder by sautéing chopped onions, diced celery, and diced carrots in a large, heavy-bottomed soup pot with butter, cooking the vegetables over medium heat until they softened, released their natural sweetness, and became fragrant and tender. Diced potatoes were added to the pot, along with rich turkey broth that had been made by simmering the turkey carcass with water, onions, celery, and herbs for several hours to extract every bit of flavor, or chicken broth if turkey broth wasn't available, or if time didn't allow for making stock from scratch. The soup simmered on the stovetop until the potatoes were fork-tender, cooked through completely, and beginning to break down slightly and thicken the broth naturally. Once the potatoes were perfectly soft, all-purpose flour was sprinkled over the vegetables to create a roux that would thicken the soup and give it that characteristic creamy chowder consistency. Then whole milk or heavy cream was slowly stirred into the pot while whisking constantly to prevent lumps and ensure a smooth, velvety texture. The diced turkey was added to the chowder, along with frozen corn kernels that added sweetness, color, and additional texture, and the soup simmered gently for another 10 to 15 minutes, allowing all the flavors to meld together beautifully and the turkey to heat through completely. Some moms added a bay leaf, dried thyme, or a pinch of smoky paprika for extra depth of flavor and aromatic complexity, and the finished chowder was seasoned carefully with salt and freshly ground black pepper to taste, adjusted until the seasoning was perfect and balanced. Turkey chowder was served steaming hot in large, deep bowls with oyster crackers, saltine crackers, or crusty bread on the side for dipping and soaking up the delicious, creamy broth. Families loved the thick, comforting texture and the satisfying chunks of turkey, potatoes, and vegetables in every spoonful, And the chowder was especially popular in the days following Thanksgiving or Christmas, when families had plenty of leftover turkey and wanted a warm, filling meal that felt completely different from the holiday roast. Turkey tetrazzini was an elegant Italian-inspired casserole that transformed leftover roast turkey into a creamy, cheesy pasta dish that tasted like something from a fancy restaurant and made families feel sophisticated and well cared for. Moms started by dicing leftover turkey into bite-sized pieces that would distribute evenly throughout the pasta and sauce, ensuring every serving had plenty of tender protein. They cooked spaghetti or linguine according to package directions in a large pot of boiling salted water until al dente, tender but still slightly firm to the bite. Then drained the pasta thoroughly, tossed it with a little butter to prevent sticking, and set it aside while preparing the luxurious sauce. The signature tetrazzini sauce began by sautéing sliced fresh mushrooms in butter over medium-high heat until they released their moisture, turned golden brown, and developed deep, earthy flavors that would enhance the entire dish. All-purpose flour was sprinkled over the mushrooms to create a roux that would thicken the sauce. Then rich chicken or turkey broth was slowly whisked into the roux while stirring constantly to prevent any lumps from forming. Heavy cream or evaporated milk was added next, creating a sauce that was rich, velvety, luxurious, and absolutely delicious, coating the spoon beautifully and promising incredible flavor. Grated Parmesan cheese was stirred into the hot sauce, along with a splash of dry sherry or white cooking wine, though many budget-conscious 1950s moms omitted the alcohol entirely and used extra broth instead. And the sauce was seasoned carefully with salt, white pepper, and a small pinch of ground nutmeg that added warmth and depth without overwhelming the delicate flavors. The cooked spaghetti and diced turkey were folded gently into the creamy mushroom sauce, tossing everything together until every strand of pasta and piece of turkey was coated completely and generously with the rich, cheesy sauce. The entire mixture was transferred to a greased casserole dish, smoothed into an even layer. Then the top was sprinkled generously with additional grated Parmesan cheese and buttered breadcrumbs that would turn golden, crispy, and irresistibly crunchy during baking. The casserole was placed in a preheated moderate oven and baked until bubbling enthusiastically around the edges, golden brown and crispy on top, and heated through completely, filling the kitchen with an absolutely incredible aroma. The finished turkey tetrazzini was creamy, cheesy, elegant, and incredibly satisfying, with each bite offering tender turkey, silky pasta, earthy mushrooms, rich cream sauce, and nutty Parmesan cheese that melted on the tongue. These 5 turkey planned-over dinners, turkey hash, turkey divan casserole, turkey scallop, turkey chowder, and turkey tetrazzini prove 1950s moms were strategic meal planners. They transformed one Sunday roast turkey into 5 completely different dinners. Let's see the final 5 genius transformations using lamb that stretched budgets all week long. Lamb and vegetable stew was a hearty, warming transformation that turned leftover roast lamb into a completely different dinner, perfect for cold evenings, rainy days, and times when families needed something comforting, filling, and deeply satisfying. Moms started by dicing leftover lamb into bite-sized cubes, carefully trimming away any excess fat or gristle to ensure every piece was tender and delicious, then gathered an assortment of vegetables from the pantry, refrigerator, and root cellar. Carrots, potatoes, onions, celery, turnips, and parsnips were common choices that added flavor, nutrition, color, and substance to the stew. In a large, heavy-bottomed soup pot or Dutch oven, butter or reserved lamb drippings were heated over medium heat until shimmering and fragrant, creating a flavorful fat base for building layers of flavor. Chopped onions were added to the hot fat and sautéed slowly until soft, translucent, and slightly caramelized around the edges, releasing their natural sweetness and creating a savory foundation for the stew. The diced lamb was added to the pot next and browned slightly on all sides, developing deeper, richer flavors through the Maillard reaction that made the meat taste more complex and delicious. Lamb curry was an exotic, flavorful transformation that turned leftover roast lamb into a mildly spiced aromatic dish that tasted nothing like the original roast and introduced American families to international flavors, spices, and cooking techniques that broadened their culinary horizons. Moms started by dicing leftover lamb into small, uniform, bite-sized pieces that would cook evenly and distribute well throughout the curry sauce, ensuring every serving had plenty of tender protein. They prepared the curry base by sautéing chopped onions and diced apples, a classic addition in 1950s, American curry recipes that added natural sweetness, subtle fruitiness, and depth of flavor. In butter over medium heat until the onions softened, turned translucent, and the apples began to break down slightly and release their juices. Curry powder, a popular and widely available spice blend in 1950s, American supermarkets that contained turmeric, coriander, cumin, ginger, and other warm spices, was added generously to the onions and apples. Stirring constantly for about 1 minute to toast the spices and release their essential oils and aromatic compounds. All-purpose flour was sprinkled over the curry-coated onions and apples to create a roux that would thicken the sauce and give it body. Then rich lamb or chicken broth was slowly whisked into the mixture while stirring constantly to prevent lumps and ensure a smooth, silky texture. Whole milk or coconut milk, if available, though most budget-conscious 1950s families used regular dairy milk, was added to the curry base, creating a sauce that was creamy, golden, aromatic, and absolutely delicious, coating the spoon beautifully and smelling incredible. Lamb shepherd's pie was the authentic, traditional version of the beloved British comfort food that transformed leftover roast lamb into a hearty, satisfying casserole perfect for feeding hungry families on cold evenings, busy weeknights, and times when everyone needed something warm, comforting, and deeply satisfying. Moms started by finely chopping or coarsely grinding leftover lamb, removing any excess fat, gristle, or tough connective tissue to ensure every bite was tender, flavorful, and easy to eat. Then they sautéed the lamb with diced onions and finely diced carrots in a large, deep skillet with butter or lamb drippings until the vegetables softened, released their natural sweetness, and the lamb developed deeper, richer flavors through gentle browning. Leftover lamb gravy from Sunday's roast was stirred into the skillet to create a rich, savory sauce that bound the meat and vegetables together. Or, if no gravy remained, resourceful moms made a quick pan gravy by sprinkling flour over the lamb and vegetables, stirring to coat everything evenly. Then gradually adding beef broth while stirring constantly until the mixture thickened into a smooth, flavorful gravy that coated every piece of meat and vegetable beautifully. Frozen peas were stirred into the lamb mixture, along with classic British seasonings like salt, freshly ground black pepper, dried thyme, and a generous splash of Worcestershire sauce that added umami depth, savory complexity, and authentic flavor to the filling. The lamb and vegetable mixture was spread evenly across the bottom of a greased casserole dish, creating a hearty, protein-rich base layer that would support the mashed potato topping. Leftover mashed potatoes from Sunday dinner were spread generously over the lamb filling, covering it completely like a warm, comforting blanket. Lamb and rice pilaf was an elegant Middle Eastern-inspired transformation that turned leftover roast lamb into a flavorful, aromatic one-pot meal that tasted exotic, sophisticated, and completely different from the original Sunday roast dinner. Moms started by dicing leftover lamb into small, uniform pieces that would distribute evenly throughout the rice and cook gently without becoming tough or dry. Then they prepared the pilaf base by sautéing finely chopped onions in butter over medium heat until soft, golden, and slightly caramelized, releasing their natural sweetness and creating a flavorful foundation. Long-grain white rice, the most common variety in 1950s American kitchens, was added to the skillet with the onions and toasted briefly while stirring constantly, coating each grain with butter and allowing the rice to turn slightly translucent and develop a subtle, nutty aroma that would enhance the final dish. Rich lamb or chicken broth was poured carefully over the toasted rice, along with warm, aromatic seasonings like salt, freshly ground black pepper, ground cinnamon, ground allspice, and a pinch of expensive saffron threads if the family budget allowed, though most practical 1950s families substituted turmeric for its beautiful golden color and subtle earthy flavor at a fraction of the cost. The diced lamb was stirred gently into the rice mixture along with golden raisins that would plump up during cooking and add bursts of natural sweetness, slivered almonds that provided crunch and nutty richness, and frozen green peas that contributed color, nutrition, and a pop of brightness to every bite. Lamb and barley soup was the final transformation of Sunday's roast lamb, using every last bit of meat, every scrap of leftover vegetables, and even the bare bones to create a hearty, nutritious soup that stretched the roast to its absolute limit and proved that nothing ever went to waste in a well-managed 1950s kitchen. Moms started by carefully removing any remaining lamb from the bone, dicing it into small, bite-sized pieces that would be tender and easy to eat in the finished soup. Then they placed the picked clean lamb bones in a large, heavy-bottomed soup pot along with cold water, roughly chopped onions, carrots, celery, a few peppercorns, and bay leaves to simmer slowly for several hours on the back burner, creating a rich, deeply flavorful lamb broth that extracted every bit of goodness, nutrition, and flavor from the bones. Once the broth was ready, aromatic and perfectly seasoned, the bones were carefully removed and discarded, and the broth was strained through a fine mesh sieve to remove any solids. On vegetable pieces or impurities, leaving behind only clear, golden, intensely flavorful liquid that would become the foundation of the soup. Pearl barley, an inexpensive, nutritious, and filling grain that was a pantry staple in most 1950s homes, was added to the strained lamb broth and simmered gently until the barley grains became tender, plump, chewy, and perfectly cooked, absorbing the rich lamb flavor and adding wonderful texture, heartiness, and substance to the soup. The diced lamb was added back to the pot along with freshly diced carrots, celery, potatoes, and onions, and the soup simmered for another 30 to 40 minutes, allowing all the vegetables to become perfectly tender, the flavors to meld together beautifully, and the soup to thicken slightly as the barley released its natural starches into the broth. Some moms added canned tomatoes or tomato paste for extra depth, richness, acidity, and a beautiful reddish tint. These 1950s planned-over dinners prove our moms and grandmas were absolute geniuses who could stretch one Sunday roast into an entire week of completely different meals without ever wasting a bite or spending extra money. They didn't just cook. They strategically planned every meal from Sunday through Saturday, transforming beef roasts into hash, stroganoff, and shepherd's pie, turning roast chicken into croquettes, pot pies, and elegant soufflés, and stretching turkey and lamb into curries, casseroles, and hearty soups that fed families for pennies. These weren't random leftovers thrown together at the last minute. They were carefully planned transformations that kept dinner interesting, budgets balanced, and families happy all week long. Every recipe in this collection cost under $3, fed 6 people generously, and required less than 15 minutes of prep time, proving that smart planning beats expensive grocery bills every single time. Now it's your turn to bring back this genius strategy.